Today is going to be a great day. I'm Matt, I'm the Whiskey Nerd, and these are whiskies. Specifically, these are the second year of Dingle's Wheel of the Year series. Now, if you're not familiar with this kind of series that Dingle are doing, I'll give you a quick overview. It's been going on for 2 years, and this is the second year of releases. So the first year, they released 4 whiskies, and this year they have 5 whiskies, going from the spring equinox, the summer solstice, the autumn equinox, the autumn solstice, and the special kind of Wren's Day celebration they do down in Dingle. This is a series where Dingle are releasing special whiskies to kind of mark different Celtic holidays, whether it's the festival of Samhain, or in English what you might call Halloween, all the way through to like the summer solstice or the winter solstice or the equinox, and those kind of festivals where they have these Celtic kind of pagan festivals, and they're using that to release different whiskies while they kind of mature their stocks up so they can have like an age statement whiskey. So they're releasing these whiskies as they go. They're all kind of the same formula, so there are some that are pot still and there are some that are single malt whiskies, but they all spent about 5 years in bourbon casks before being finished for between 2 and 4 years in different casks. So this one here, the Dreoilín, which was just released, this one here was finished in a Muscatel wine cask, whereas the Grianstad and Gheimhridh, the winter equinox or the winter solstice, this was finished in Tawny port cask. So you get different kind of finishes in different kind of whiskies. I have already done a video comparing the first years of whiskey releases. I'll put a link to that up there, I'll put a link down below, because I kind of ranked those 4 whiskies, came up with my favorite one and said, okay, great, next year I'm going to do the next whiskies, cut my favorite one of those, and I will compare those 2 favorite whiskies to see which was my top whiskey from the entire 9 bottle series. So if you want to see a video where I compare the winner of this week's video versus the winner of last year's video, make sure to check back next week, because I will have a video on that coming out for that. But now, rather than talking about all these whiskies individually, I'm just going to dive right into them, because there are 5 great little whiskies on the table in front of me. Starting off with the Cónocht and Earraigh. This here was, like I said, a bourbon cask matured single malt whiskey that was finished in Cabernet Sauvignon wine casks, coming in at 50.5% alcohol by volume. Again, yeah, that's really nice. Like, you can see some of these maybe I might have liked more than others because they're a bit lower than others, but very nice little whiskey. Like, Dingle's single malt has this very like herbal, almost like menthol eucalyptus character to it, with that kind of the malty character, but then you get this really nice red wine influence coming through. It's really a solid little whiskey, very nice, but that wine cask is very, very strong, at least on the nose, so I'm going to go in for the palate. Cheers. Yeah, that is like spicy. It's very like black pepper, spicy on the palate, because you get that wine cask, like red wine can often have that drying, almost like black pepper, spicy character to it. And I'm definitely getting that coming through on my palate here. So I'm going to have a little bit of water and then move on to the next one. Next up is the Grianstad on tSamhraidh, or the summer equinox, so the literally the stopping of the sun, where the sun was at its highest before it goes back down. So it's the longest day of the year. This is a single pot still whiskey, again bourbon, finished in rye, and this time it has come in at 52.5. Let me just make sure of that. Yeah, 52.5% alcohol by volume. So let's go in for the nose. Yeah, much lighter. Like this here, the wine cask, super strong. Here, the rye cask, it kind of leans into, like I said, that Dingle's malt, and this is a single pot still, so it's malted and unmalted barley. The malt has this kind of like I said, kind of herbal, almost eucalyptus, menthol character. And the rye cask, rye whiskey, has that same kind of spiciness, that same kind of palate. So it just kind of supports that spiciness, but then you get a bit of extra like peppery spice from the unmalted barley coming through, much lighter on the nose than the first one. So let's go in again. Normally when I say what the difference between a single malt and a single pot still is, I say that the single pot still is a bit more spicy, the single malt is going to be a bit more biscuity. Here though, very different, because that wine cask, you get a lot of that black pepper spice up front. Here you're still getting spice, but it's much less spicy. It's almost like baking spice, like candied ginger, that kind of like where there's a bit of spice, a bit of like heat to it, but nowhere near as spicy as with that wine cask influence. Very nice. I think of the two of them, like you can probably guess from the two of them, I think I'm giving it a little bit to the Grianstad and tSamhraidh, but I've got 3 more whiskies to go through. Next up, it's the Cónocht on 4, the autumn equinox, the part of the year where the day and night are the equal amounts. They're basically the equal night, equinox, Cónocht, which means equal night or the same night. So this here, single malt, I believe, for the rum cask, yeah, single malt with a rum cask finish at 50.5%. All the single malts were at 50.5. The single pot stills came in at 52.5% ABV. On the nose, that kind of rum cask here gives you, yeah, it gives you the kind of like more caramel, more of that like bit of tropical fruits. Like I'd say that, you know, the Dingle single malt has this herbal, sometimes gingery note, but here it's like candied pineapple, candied mango, where they're dried out. You get a lot of that sugary sweetness coming through there on the nose. It feels a little higher in ABV on the nose than the other single malt. Like it feels a little spicier, a little bit like it's more coming out of the glass than that one, despite the coming in at the same ABV strength. But going for the palate and see how it is. Cheers. Much smoother on the palate. Like it's creamy, it's almost buttery. You still get that bit of tropical fruits. Yeah, you still get that kind of Dingle single malt. You get this big creamy hit, caramel, butterscotch. Then you get the tropical fruit, like that bit of pineapple, that bit of like mango, like I was saying, the gingery, kind of candied, spicy note to it. Then after you swallow it and you take a breath, you get that Dingle kind of single malt coming back through. And got that right now in my mouth with the that herbal character. Yeah, it's got a very distinctive kind of malty note, Dingle's single malt does, and that comes through here. So you're still getting a single malt whiskey, whereas you have that rum cask influence up front, rather than like sometimes where you get the malt and then you get the cask influence. It's more like the cask up front. But I'm gonna have a drink of water and go for the next one. And next up, it is the Grianstad on Gheimhridh, which is the stopping of the sun in winter, which is the shortest day of the year. So the day of the year, I think it's only like 4 or 5 hours of actual sunlight here in Ireland, maybe less. So this is like a port finish whiskey again, 50.5% ABV, single malt with a port finish. So you're gonna get like spicy berry notes, kind of like that darker vibe to it, and that's what they're going for the shortest day of the year, the day when it is the most amount of darkness. So yeah, on the nose, like, well, yeah, that's a lot. Like you can tell, I like a port finish whiskey, and I like the way Dingle's malt interacts with a port finish. I think it has this really nice character to it that lends itself. Like the port can be quite almost sickly sweet, can be very caramel syrupy, but Dingle with that kind of herbal spicy character, I think it works well, at least in my palate, for a single malt with a port finish. Like I'm not getting anything like specifically like well, there's a little like strawberry, a little bit of cherry, but there's no like, oh, I'm getting a huge amount of berries. Like I'm getting a nicely balanced malt and port finish together, at least on the nose. So I'm gonna go in for the palate here. Cheers. Very different on the palate, much more port influence. Definitely getting that, because it's a tawny port, which means it's been aged. Like a ruby port hasn't really been aged, or been aged for a very small amount of time. A tawny port has been aged for a long time, so it typically loses some of those red berry notes and gets more caramelized sugary sweetness, and that's definitely coming through here. You get that really, really rich, syrupy, dense, tawny port character coming through, mixing with that Dingle, the single malt that I talked about how many times so far in this video. But yeah, it mixes, I think, really well. It's mouth-watering. It's a little bit peppery, not the same amount of peppery like as that wine influence there. Like I'm gonna go back and try all these against each other separately. I'll probably do a little fast forward of that, but it's definitely like both kind of a wine influence, and this last one is also a wine cask influence, but it's just, I think it's just a little bit more, like a little better incorporated here on this one. Yeah, so I'm gonna go in for a little bit of a glass of water, and then go in for the last one, the most recently released Lá an Dreoilín. And by the way, I will have links to all these whiskey reviews down below if you want to check out the individual kind of in-depth whiskey releases, because this one here was just released like a couple of weeks ago there at the end of 2024. Lá an Dreoilín is the 26th of December, so it's what's sometimes called Stephen's Day. In Dingle it's called Lá an Dreoilín, or Wren's Day, where everyone dresses up like the little character on the bottle there. So Dingle, this kind of Wednesday festival, is on the 26th of December. So it was just released there very, very recently. So it's good for the nose. Oh, sorry. This is a single pot still coming in at 46% ABV, and it was finished, like I said, in Muscatel wine casks. So the very first whiskey they released in this series and the very last whiskey they released in the series were in that bourbon and then Muscatel wine. But interestingly, this one here is actually about 9 years old. It's almost 9 years old. The first whiskey was about 7 years old because, yeah, that 2 years of extra maturation. This here was 5 years in bourbon and almost 4 years in the Muscatel wine cask. So it has a lot of that wine influence coming through. So let's go in for the nose. Like, comparing it against the other single pot still on the table here, it's a lot deeper. Like, the thing with whiskey is, like, age statement, it doesn't really matter, you know, as long as it's a good whiskey in a good cask, but there is a certain character you get with an aged whiskey where it rounds out, and this here has a nice rounded character where it still has that spiciness of like that single pot still you'd expect, but it's almost just like more rounded off. I don't want to say the word smooth because that's overused, but I think it's a bit more rounded off. Here, like, you get that wine influence, kind of like almost like citrusy limes, like Muscatel. It's quite a sweet kind of fortified wine, and you get this almost limes, not lemon, yeah, more like limes with that kind of like tangy citrus. You get that rather than the sharp citrus. But yeah, just very sweet. Again, that candied kind of ginger, the herbal note coming through, but a lot of that wine influence. So let's go in for the palate. Cheers. That's where you get your single pot still spice. You get that kind of heavy duty, almost like spiciness. You get a little bit of black pepper actually. You get a little bit of like, again, that might be the wine influence, that might be the pot still spiciness coming through, but a little bit of black pepper, a little bit of like that, again, that lime, almost buttery again. Like, I think there's a bit of smooth, I don't want to say smooth, but a bit of smoothed out, rounded out edges to it, where you get that kind of like creamy vanilla from the bourbon cask is allowed to kind of just round out some of like those sharper or spicy edges. You can still taste them, but you get that kind of rounded character. The wine cask is there, it's present, it's rich. You get a nice amount of the wine cask without it being like I said, the only thing you can taste. So I'm gonna go in for a little bit more water. I'm gonna do a little fast forward, taste them kind of back and forth against each other, and find out my rankings for these whiskies. Okay, so I've gone through them all a second time, tried the nose again, tried the palate again, tried them kind of in different orientations, like this one, then that one. I think I've come up with my ranking. So I'll go from least to favorite, so I'll just go through it. Least favorite was the Cónocht and Earraigh. Nice, but I think that wine cask influence was a bit too strong. It was a bit too like sharp and peppery. I wasn't really able to taste as much of the whiskey as I was with the other whiskies in this series. Next up was the Cónocht and Fómhair. Don't get me wrong, quite nice. I did like that kind of tropical fruit, the mango, the pineapple that I was getting, but it was not as good, I think, as the other ones. I think the Grianstad and tSamhraidh, which was my next favorite, that one was, I think, my favorite of these three so far. Like, this was quite nice. The kind of the character of the pot still, the character of that rye cask, I think they worked together really well to make a kind of a softer, almost delicate whiskey, but that still had a lot of flavor. Next up for number 2, Grianstad and Gheimhridh. I think that port finish really nice, really rich, really like a lot of flavor. But I think Law and Dreoilín just had this, I think between the two of them, like, they're both very tasty. But I think Law and Dreoilín, the most recent release, is just a bit rounder. It's just a bit almost more fully developed. Like, this one was released about a year ago compared to this one, like an extra year in cask. Might not sound like a lot, but I think it just gave it that extra bit of roundness. It gave it that extra bit of richness where it wasn't like I was getting the whiskey and the cask influence, the cask finish. I was getting the two of them together overlapping, and I think that just made for a slightly better, slightly more enjoyable whiskey. But what do you think? Have you tried any of these whiskeys? What do you think of these different whiskeys and all their different kind of orientations? I will be trying out pretty much right after this video. I'll be trying this video here, Law and Dreoilín, against the winner of last year's video, the Lunasa whiskey. So I'll be comparing those two and seeing which of the 9 bottle series was my favorite. If you have a particular favorite, let me know down in the comments below. I put out whiskey reviews on Wednesdays, like all the reviews of these whiskeys. I put out cocktail recipes featuring whiskey every Friday, and I put out videos like this every now and then where I talk about different kind of whiskey. I talk about different kind of like things in whiskey. I compare different ones. I come up with lists of things to do. So if you want to see more like that, make sure you hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button, and if you've got an idea for a different kind of videos that I could do, let me know down in the comments below. But right now, I'm gonna enjoy this whiskey, and I'll see you next time. Sláinte.